Perfect. Well, welcome. Thank you for doing this, by the way, Peter. Appreciate it. A friend of mine, Steven Zwick, sort of, I think, maybe set us up or something. I can't remember. But
Makes sense.
for the folks that aren't familiar, I know you're a professor of journalism, a professor of sustainability at ASU, Arizona State, out in Phoenix, I suppose. And then also you've made a bunch of films. So awesome. Welcome to our little community. As you can see, I'm a proponent of sustainability as well, but using meat to do it. So can you were involved in the film A Fish Called Wanda, which I remember watching many years ago. I think wasn't Jamie Lee Curtis, I think, was in that one. I remember.
Yes,
Funny movie. But tell us a little bit about your background, if you don't mind, for those that aren't familiar with you.
Well, if you're bringing up A Fish Called Wanda, I made tea for the producer. That was my big job on that film. But I did get to record a line of dialogue with Jamie Lee Curtis. It was shot in England, and they needed her to yell the lead character, John Cleese's character's name, Archie, and they didn't have it. So we went to her house, and the only quiet place was in her closet. So there I was, like 22, in a closet with Jamie Lee Curtis with my microphone and my headphones, and she's screaming. It was a good day. It was a good day. But I'm a filmmaker by trade. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky, and in 2007, I started a film called Carbon Nation, which is a solutions to climate change movie. We don't care if you believe in climate change, because the solutions just made good business sense. And in that research, in that film, and all the people I met afterwards, actually, it was the soil that kept coming up as a solution for climate change. The way we treat our soils is a huge problem with climate change, but the way we could be treating our soils could be a really good solution. And so I focused in on that, and I honed in on grazing specifically. I met a guy named Alan Williams, and he was doing this thing that we now call adaptive multi-paddock grazing. And Alan was making his land a lot better by the way he was training his cattle, the way he was moving his cattle. He was replicating the way herds of bison moved across the Great Plains, just doing it in a much smaller fashion, but within the confines of his 1,000-acre farm in Mississippi. And within 3 years, he was flipping that place and making it into a thriving place. You'll like this story. He found the farm. It was an old deer hunting area that was so bad, there was no deer, that the people sold it for a song. He comes on, does this new form of grazing with 3-4 years. They're trying to buy it back because the deer were so plentiful on that land. So nature comes to where nature wants to go. So the way he's regenerating his land, nature doesn't do anything it doesn't want to do, right? And so I started making these films. That first film was a short film called Soil Carbon Cowboys, and I started meeting other farmers in very, very different parts of the country, regenerating their land with the way they were moving their cattle. And I was just fascinated by it because it was such a consistent story everywhere I went, but there was virtually no science. So most of the science community was like, it's not real because we haven't studied it. It was not real because they hadn't seen papers on it, but they weren't studying it. And so I found this renegade group of scientists, because I'd just gotten out to Arizona State in 2013, who also wanted to study this type of grazing. So we put together a team, and we have then been doing years of research in the field comparing what we call AMP grazing, adaptive multi-paddock grazing, with conventional grazing. And we just published our first paper, and the carbon and the nitrogen on the AMP side is significantly higher than it is on the conventional side. And we'll be putting out a lot more papers about this. We're making a big documentary about it. And I'm just watching farmers change their land, change their life by the way they're grazing their cattle, by focusing on nature, working with nature instead of fighting nature. It's a phenomenal bunch of stories, and I'm just really, really lucky that I'm part of it in a way now. Besides filmmaking, I'm helping to wrangle these scientists as much as I can. Some of them are pretty wild, bucking broncos.
Well, let me just, and I've interviewed Alan a couple of times. I think he's out at Joyce Farms. Alan's a great guy, and he just is very nice, very good at putting the science into sort of layman's terms, and I really appreciate it with Alan. I've talked to so many of the folks in the regenerative world now, we continue to see that movement grow for sure. In fact, I was meeting with a couple of guys that they found that this is becoming, like you said, regardless if you feel climate change is a problem or not, it does make good business sense, and it's seeing that a lot of high wealth individuals are using regenerative agriculture cattle as part of their investment portfolio, and they may have people manage those for them, but it's improving the land so that their property value actually goes up. And as a side benefit, you get to make great nutritional products and help the environment as well. So when you said you went back and the carbonation, so I mean, there's been a lot of talk about climate change. I mean, it's it's been sort of temporarily supplanted by this COVID pandemic, but we're not going to see that go away anytime soon.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of proposals on what to do about it. I don't think nothing is going to be done, but there's a lot of my concern is there's a lot of proposals made on science we don't fully understand yet. And, there's a lot of people that say we should just stop eating meat and we should just shut down all the animals and that type of stuff, which is, I think there's many other solutions that can be done. You can sort of not throw the baby out with the bathwater type of situation is what I see this.
Yeah.
What have you discovered? I mean, obviously you've been doing this and probably studying it pretty intensely for the last, decade and a half, I guess. And so what conclusions have you come to up to this point?
Well, I've learned a lot about science from the scientists, and the scientists we're working on have learned a lot about agriculture from the farmers. So that's our order of learning, farmers to scientists, and then I get to learn from everybody. I'm very concerned about climate change, but I can find a heck of a lot of touch points with someone who's not. And we would agree on 75 or 80% of the things we should do anyway. I don't know anyone who wants to give a child asthma because they want a cold beer. So why not use a solar panel? Like 90% of Americans want solar power. It's a no-brainer. And you look down through renewable energies, everybody wants it at a very high level. But what I've learned really is our soils are imperiled. Our soils are in really, really bad shape. So all the scientists I know who know about climate change and also know about soils are very worried about climate change and much more worried about our soils. So if we look at that, our ability to grow food in a healthy way, our ability to get nutrition into our food through all the micronutrients that are in healthy soil, through all the beautiful fungi interactions with the microbes, if we want that, if we want to be able to grow food for our grandchildren, we have to rebuild our soils. And I personally haven't found anything close to the power of rebuilding soils as I have with AMP grazing. It's a phenomenal thing, inches in a decade, where I was told it's an inch every 1,000 years. And so to rebuild soil. So I would say to all my friends, carnivorous, veganivorous, or whatever the word I just tried to make up, you want animals grazing on the land that you grow your food on, because you're going to get more nutrient dense food. And Fred Provenza, who I hope you bring on your show if you haven't yet, he's all about the nutrient density in the food and the forage. And I'm telling you, we're making ourselves unhealthy by having food that doesn't have enough nutrients in it. And this grazing method that we've been studying for a long time, like you say, it's phenomenal. And the data is coming in now. We did a really rigorous scientific study that hadn't happened. And so now, is that the end of the game? No, science isn't about knowing. Science is about learning, right? Science is always evolving. We don't really understand gravity, but I'm going to trust the science of the airplane to take me someplace. That's okay. I don't have to have a definitive understanding of gravity to know that I got a good chance of taking off and landing safely. Everybody wants science to never change or to never say I've made a mistake. That's just, we're human beings. Of course we're going to learn new things. They didn't know tectonic plates existed. They laughed at the guy who first thought of that. He died with people laughing at him. And then they realized, oh, wow, he was right. So science evolves. There's a lot of people who do not want cattle on the planet because they've been told how bad conventional forms of grazing and feedlots and that sort of stuff is for the planet. And there's some logic there, but it's not the farmers who need to be attacked. The farmers need to be given information. The farmers need to be given information so they can make a decision. And farmers are smart and they're struggling and they're hurting and they're killing themselves at the highest rate in the United States. And so my thing is, let's do the science. Let's get the information to farmers. Let's show them that their land could be more productive. They might not have to have a day job, which most farmers do, off-farm jobs. They might be able to produce enough food on their land just by increasing their productivity, by using nature as the starting point, by giving nature a seat at the table, as my buddy Russ Concert says at Blue Nest Beef. It's working. I'm seeing it working everywhere. So why wouldn't you try it? You know? And so there's a huge need to change the way we grow our food. That is obvious. That is obvious. The experiment on how cheap we can produce our food has been done. We have figured out how to produce food cheaply. But you're a doctor. You're a healthy human being. I wish I had abs like a tenth of what you've got. And you know, if you put that cheap food into the same bucket as your healthcare costs, how cheap is it? Right? And so I've just gone on a ramble there, but that's where I'm at right now. We have to rebuild our soils, and this type of grazing is a phenomenal tool to do that, and it's a phenomenal tool for the people who grow our food. I didn't come at this because I knew much about farming at all. I came at this because I was worried about the climate. But now that I've met all these farmers, I'm an advocate for farmers. I'll go to the mat for them.
Yeah, I have interviewed Fred previously, and also Russ, and so I you know, like I said, probably most of the people you've
Yeah.
known in that community I've
You know the
already
team.
talked to. So, but one of the things, and you know, I came at this from a health standpoint, and it kind of reached the same conclusion, whether it's planetary health or individual human health, the solution seems to be, you know, converging on the same answer. One of the things, you know, as a professor of journalism, you got to reach the people. There's got to be a message, and I'm not seeing this message. I mean, within my community, you know, we understand regenerative ag or adaptive multi-paddock grazing or holistic or whatever term you want to look at. I had Bobby Gill from the Savory Institute educate me. If you want to find the science, look up AMP grazing, because the holistic stuff, it doesn't really show in the scientific paper. So if we want to call it, you know, AMP grazing, then that's how you find that. But how do you? Because I mean, there's a huge push, and the cynic in me says it's coming from industry that wants to capitalize on cheap production, continue this cheap food model, and now basically supplant animal agriculture with very cheap, highly processed plant agriculture,
Right.
In the guise of climate change or health, and which I think is honestly, you know, not particularly honest and altruistic. I think it's more just pure greed. But how do we get the message out there? You know, I mean, obviously films help, but I mean, is there a backlash from doing that? Because you just don't see front page of New York Times, regenerative agriculture can save the planet. You know, I mean, I haven't seen it yet, but maybe we can do that.
I think there was one. The New York Times is starting to talk about it. The Washington Post is starting to talk about it. I think journalism writ large is very slow to covering climate change well. You know, President Biden just had his first press conference and wasn't asked one question about climate change, when he's made it very clear that he's making climate change a yardstick for all departments of the government. So yeah, I ask that question a lot with my colleagues. They know the question I'm going to ask when I raise my hand at a function these days, with my colleagues at the Cronkite School of Journalism. All I can do is what I can do, right? I'm not in charge of anybody else. I'm in charge of my time and my thoughts and my actions. And so I'm spending my time telling the stories of these farmers that are doing amazing work. And now the science team I'm working with, many of which you've interviewed, like Jason Roundtree, I'll be telling their story. And at a certain point, it'll click in. You've asked me on. You didn't know who I was how many months ago, right? So this is the positive sign. People understand that working with nature is a good idea. People get that. And so that's what we found in our research, is just people trust nature. I don't care what politics you have, people trust nature. And so that's where we come from. And so the communications piece, you know, we're making a 4-part documentary right now on this research project we're doing with, you know, 10 universities and research groups and a bunch of funders. And that's hopefully going to be on the air early next year. It's called Roots So Deep. But you mentioned industry, and I've been going after industry specifically with these ideas. The first industry I went after was the oil and gas industry. That's how I met Russ Concert. He was at Shell Oil. And I said, you guys are spending so much money on carbon capture and storage mechanically, $1 billion plant, $150 a ton to bring down a ton of CO2. Why don't you work with farmers and ranchers and you can bring down that carbon and actually do something good for the planet. And then you could sell carbon neutral fuel. And Shell is selling now carbon neutral fuel in the Netherlands, the UK, I think Germany, and soon in the UK, using nature as a method of drawing down carbon. Now, a lot of people would look at that and go, yeah, greenwash, it's bullshit, excuse my language, you know, it ain't real. But you can measure it, you can check, you can verify how they're doing it, and you can hold their feet to the fire, which I recommend everybody do. But I think that when you have large industries looking at soil health as a piece of their scenario planning, as a piece of their future planning, because they need it, then I think that's time well spent on our team's part. And we had a good impact within Shell. They now have a nature-based solutions division. McDonald's is our biggest funder on this research. Now you could say, oh, they're just funding research to make sure they don't have to change. Well, they put in $4.5 million, so it's not just sort of scoot out of my office money, it's real money. And our research is showing that their supply chain needs to change a lot. So it's not like they've funded our research to make things easy. They actually took the hardest road they could take. But they know that their supply chain is not stable, it's not secure, because they know how bad our soils are. So as a business, they know they need a better system to produce that food. And as you said perfectly earlier, when humans are healthy, the soil's healthy, there's a complete connection, right? And so when folks are looking at sort of like, you know, the plant-based products that are out there right now, eat them, enjoy them. But when you're told that it's better for the planet, the data doesn't support that. At least the way we're growing the soy and the products within that. The data doesn't support that. Could you grow soy in a regenerative way? Yes. I hope people do, but I don't see that happening at scale, anywhere close to scale at this point. Is it better for you? Well, there's a whole lot of data fighting that right now. Fred Provenza will know better than I will. But if you like it, eat it. What's the problem, right? But if you think you're saving the planet with that product, do a little bit more research, because I think there's a lot of nuance there, and I think there's a lot more data that you might want to look at. You know, I've got friends that were vegan, and the main reason they were vegan was of animal rights, animal welfare. They just didn't like seeing animals in cages. And then they see Will Harris's farm through our film, and they started eating meat again if they knew where to buy it, if they knew who to buy it from, if they knew the farmer. And so human health, soil health, the gut microbes, the human gut microbes, the soil microbes, all of it, it's all connected. I meant to say the cow's gut microbes when I first said the first part of that. And why wouldn't you want to work with nature? You know, 3.2 billion years ago, cyanobacteria started burping oxygen, and the world changed. And so we've got 3.2 billion years of R&D behind the system that we're utilizing with the grazing and the cattle and the grasslands evolution, coevolution. Why wouldn't you want to use that? That's really where I've just come down to. It's like, I'll trust nature every time.
Yeah, I've had the pleasure of interviewing Will a couple times now, and you know, one of the things, because you've talked to all these people, and I just wonder what your perspective is, you know, because many of them will say, well, you know, my land, you know, I'm capturing more soil, I've been able to prove it this way. I'm more productive on this same patch of land than I was doing the conventional method. And the critics will say, well, it's not scalable, it's not sustainable, you can't produce the amount of food you need by doing it in a regenerative fashion, and therefore we have to rely on the industrial scale animal agriculture. Have you seen anything that would sort of convince you otherwise? Because there's people that are just anti-meat in general, and they'll say, well, there's a study that shows that, you know, you can't scale it, and I think that's based on some traditional grass-finished grazing where they don't do the AMP stuff. So what is your conclusion on scalability of this? Because you mentioned the difficulty to scale sustainable soy, but what do you think about scaling animal agriculture?
Well, I didn't say it was difficult. I just said I haven't been seeing sustainable soy at scale. I think it's totally doable. I think everything we can imagine is doable. I don't want to be one of those guys that keeps referring to, oh, I did this, but our films are telling stories, and so we made them to tell these stories. And scale, you can see a farm with 5,000 head of steer grazing in this manner in our film Herd Impact. 5,000 head is a giant herd. It's not the biggest in the country, but it's by far not the smallest. And so there is a perfect example of scale. And when you think about Will Harris and Gabe Brown, you know, they're doing what I'm sure your listeners and viewers know of stacking enterprises, right? Where they're growing a lot of different foods on the same land with the same rainfall. And so the idea of can we scale? Well, guess what? If you need land to do it and you're treating the land in a regenerative way, I don't care that it takes a little bit more land. It might. Jason Roundtree and Paige Stanley, they say it takes more land to finish in a regenerative fashion than it does in a conventional fashion, the meat specifically. Okay, then. Guess what? We got a lot of fallow farmland that's sitting there doing nothing. Let's regenerate it. Let's get more farmers. Let's make more people live in rural economies where we can get the schools populated and we can get those economies going again. I don't see a problem of growing a farmer middle class and seeing more land used in a positive way. We are killing our grassland birds. They need grassland. That's why they're called grassland birds, you know? And so these farmers are creating grasslands for these birds. We're seeing it in our data. Literally, there's a fence and there's an amp farmer and there's a conventional farmer. And this farm has a lot more of those grassland birds that are really, really imperiled. And they got their butts on the fence facing that way. Well, we want that farmer over here to know that because they have an option. They have an option to make land for those birds too. We don't make fun of that farmer. We don't look down on that farmer. We don't shame that farmer, blame that farmer. We say, hey, check it out. You were taught the way to farm by your family. We respect that 100%. But check this out. We're doing new data right now. You might be able to do a lot more with that land that your family gave you. And that's what our study is about. It's no blame, no shame. It's opportunity, right? And so communication is key. You know, consumers want to know that they're eating healthy food more and more and more, which is what you're doing so freaking well. And these farmers are doing better. I mean, you saw what happened in COVID. I don't know if you talked to Alan Williams during COVID, but all the farmers we know that sell directly to customers, overnight they lost all their restaurant business. And overnight their sales increased 1,200%. Because people were clamoring to have healthier food because people were putting the connection together. If I don't have a pre-existing condition, I'll actually be healthier. And so the food is a direct connection. And again, I ramble. But
I can't remember when I think I'm pretty sure I interviewed Alan within the last year, and I know we talked. I know there was a rancher in Colorado, he was a buffalo rancher, and he was struggling because he had lost his restaurant contracts, and this is back probably in April, and I had saw it on social media, and I made an attempt to let this guy, people know that he was hurting. He sold out within a day. He was like, I can't fill orders. I'm done. I'm full. And the interesting thing is, again, I'm a physician. I had very little interest or knowledge about ranching or farming up until recently. And I think about, I haven't even heard the term regenerative agriculture 3 or 4 years ago. Now I see dozens, if not hundreds of ranchers that are doing this now. And I see the growth. Have you been able to quantify the growth of this movement in the US or other parts of the world? I mean, are you seeing more and more? Does it seem to be growing at a steady pace?
It seems to be growing. I use Alan Williams as my guide just by how many more people are coming to his Understanding Ag school with Gabe Brown and the other fellas and ladies. I don't know the numbers. I'm not sure the USDA is tracking it yet. I hope they do. I hope they start tracking it better. We think it's about 2% of American cattle raisers are using some form of AMP grazing, 1 to 2%. Obviously that's small, but it seems to be growing. And again, this is what I say with Russ all the time, what does critical mass look like before it hits, And so it's worth my time to be spending my time doing what we're doing, which is the filming, the research, meeting the farmers, telling their stories. And at a certain point, it will take off. The other solution is we ruin our soils permanently. I don't like that. I don't consider that a viable option. I think that we're in crisis mode. Whether people know it or not, we are. And I'm not saying that to scare folks. I'm saying that to just wake folks up a little bit, understand this is the situation. And as consumers, buy your food from the farmers who are doing it this way. Support them and become a farmer yourself if you want. There's a lot of people who really want to become farmers. It's exciting.
Yeah, every time I talk to one of those guys, like when I've talked to Joel Salatin and some of the other folks, I mean, they have such a passion, and you can tell they're just happy people. It makes me like, let me fast forward through this part of my life so I can get there and get on a ranch and and do
Right?
that road. Yeah,
Right?
it's like, yeah, I just want to go to the ranch at some point. So I mean, it
Yeah,
is.
I'm dreaming of owning a farm that could be a teaching farm. I dream of that. That's new to me. I had a friend watch a rough cut of our new documentary, and he said, I want to become a farmer now. And when we were working with Shell years ago, one of the business executives started looking at grazing land as soon as he saw Soil Carbon Cowboys and saw Alan Williams and Gabe Brown and Neil Dennis doing their thing. It's, again, it's nature. We're attracted to it, right? Naturally, honestly, it does feel right. It feels good.
Yeah, what I'm just wondering, your thoughts on some of the other climate measures that are being proposed. I mean, I know one of the things that often gets stated is that animal agriculture is the worst thing on the possible planet, and it's worse than all other transportation, and it's the best thing you can do as an individual is just give up meat.
Right.
I find that to be very disingenuous and very a distortion of the actual facts on that. But have you given any thought to some of these other climate mitigation measures and what's realistic, what's not, what's actually known and what's not?
Well, I'd say that the argument on current conventional beef production, you can make an argument that it's creating things, making things worse. I think you can make that argument. The farmers aren't making money, and that's just start right there. Water cycling, the amount of fertilizer being used, the amount of plowing, those things are not good for the environment. The farmers that we're studying and learning from are regenerating their soil. If more farmers did what they're doing, we would be in better shape. If a lot more farmers did what they're doing, we could draw down enormous amounts of greenhouse gases, including CO2. It could be a very viable climate change mitigation technique. Not the solution, but a solution. Having a transportation sector that's based on electricity, when the electricity is being produced regeneratively, that's great, fantastic. Energy efficiency is a no-brainer. My home right now is not as energy efficient as it needs to be. I need to put strips around the doors. I need to make it more energy efficient. I'm just wasting energy, but we do have solar panels. I do have an electric car, and I plug it in during the day, and I feel good about that I'm getting solar electrons into my electric car. That's good. I think the idea that the geoengineering stuff scares the bejesus out of me. The idea of putting silvery particulate stuff up in the atmosphere, and they just had a flight canceled from a Harvard study 2 weeks ago that we're going to test some equipment, test the flight of doing a test like that, and that's, to me, insanity. Thinking you're going to change the planet permanently. We have no idea the consequences of that. I think that there's a way to produce a lot more energy regeneratively. I think solar is getting so much cheaper than it used to be. Offshore wind is an amazing, amazing opportunity. So much more powerful than onshore. And that's been getting pushback from people who I think should stop pushing back. And mainly rich folks in the Northeast. It's like, get over it. We're all on this planet, get over it. They can put the wind towers out there 15 miles, you'll see them sometimes, get over it. Those are the things that I think are strong ways to help slow down climate change. But I gotta tell you, if we really got serious about our soils, we have an amazing, amazing opportunity. And all the result is better water cycling, better food, better rural economies, farmers that aren't killing themselves. It's good for everybody.
Have you delved into some of the, I know you've mentioned a bunch of ranchers that are US based, but have you looked at this on a global scale? I mean, if I look at food production around the world, like let's take India, for instance. They have 200 million head of cattle. They have one of the large, I think the second largest head of cattle in the world, the second to Brazil. And the way they, and obviously many of them are sacred, but the way they manage those cattle is very, very inefficient, even by, just regular standards. So they've got disease cattle, they're skinny, they're sickly,
Yep.
and they're still, producing whatever issues they have. So
Yep.
what's going on globally? Is there being a big push on this globally, or can we do more globally?
Oh, I think we can all do more everywhere, down to county to globally everywhere. You mentioned India, and I was just speaking to a fellow who works at ExxonMobil, who's from India. And you're right about the herd size. You're right about the inefficiency of the herd. Could we get villages to say everyone's little plot now becomes part of a group area? We bring everyone's cattle into a small paddock and we move and we do amp grazing in a village. Can everyone come together and agree and work together? And that to me is a big question. He didn't sound real enthusiastic about that being easy, but the potential could be huge for the planet, for emissions, for things like that. And of course, I'm sure you've seen this latest stuff about red algae and reducing the methane out of the animals by 80%. And I was kind of like, okay, there's got to be more to this story. But the one thing I heard that sounded very interesting was it's actually enabling the animal to eat their food more efficiently, which is why, you would think emissions of methane would be an inefficient thing, a sign of inefficiency. So that could be really cool. Like I said, McDonald's is our main funder for our research, and they have, their 10 biggest markets, and they've all gotten together and listened to our science team present our data. And we're now advising 4 different research projects around the world in Australia, hopefully New Zealand, France, and England. And so 3 projects with a hopeful. And then I think there's a hope for Brazil as well, but I don't know if that one's as far along, where they're going to replicate what we did, which is all about science, right? Replicate, 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 see if it works in all these different places. So the idea of getting the message out there is happening. There's a farm called Wytham Farms. It's owned by Oxford University. And because of Alan Williams, they were a conventional cattle grazing operation, 1,000 acres in England, which is a big farm. And because of Alan and Gabe, they just flipped completely. And they're now in their 2nd year. And they're seeing improvements in places they're just shocked how quickly they're seeing improvements. So it's happening. Does anything happen as quickly as I want? Not the good stuff. So, but we're pounding away, man. We're not stopping. None of us are.
Yeah, for all the, it's interesting, McDonald's, because many people vilify McDonald's as just, one of the causes of the obesity epidemic, the junk food. But I've seen that, for a couple of years now, they've been talking, I think particularly in Canada is where they started this stuff. Correct me if I'm wrong, but, and then as far as the red algae, I know that's been discussed for a couple of years now. I think Australian researchers initially discovered this. And I know there's a guy at UC Davis, I don't know if you're familiar with Frank Mitloehner, but he's pushing that. And it's a really small amount. It's a small amount. I guess the question is, can they grow the algae in enough to feed the world's herd or significant parts of the herd to make that happen? And then the problem with that is if the methane argument. I just saw that the Amazon basin is putting out tremendous amounts of methane, and we're discovering all these natural amounts of methane that are being putting out, and that science is changing dramatically so that the relative contribution of animals keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Right. And yet the message is still the 2006 livestock's long shadow. Animals are the worst thing on the planet, and we're not. I'm just wondering, well, I mean, the cynic of me thinks it's, the Silicon Valley backed, fake food companies that are pushing this message out there,
that paper was written before the plant-based stuff was even happening, really. So, that paper, it overstates it. I think there might be some double counting in there as well. But here's the question I have. So no one knows exactly how many bison and elk and other ruminants were on North America before 1492, like in 1491 and back. But the idea that we heard that there was herds that took 5 days to walk by you. There's evidence of bison in Florida, in Texas, and Arizona. There's evidence that Arizona had grasslands that were incredibly healthy. West Texas was incredibly healthy grassland when it was Comancheria, right? And you only get healthy grasslands when you co-evolve with animals. There's no way to have that with, they go together. So let's say that there were a lot of methane belching animals on North America back then. I haven't seen any ice core samplings that show this giant spike of methane that disappears in 1872 when we killed all the bison. And so how is nature taking care of the methane, right? And so I do think that there are people who genuinely don't want human beings to eat meat. I've met them and I hear them. And they want to build a bunch of policies based on their own personal desires. Do I think anyone should eat meat that doesn't want to eat meat? I do not. Do I think they should tell me I shouldn't eat meat? I think I have the right to eat meat and you have the right not to eat meat, and that's called just personal choice. So I do think there's some of that going on, like the Eat Lancet paper that came out. It's a very narrow look at the situation. If they had included Jason Roundtree's work in there and Richard Teague's work in their papers, that other paper, Dazed and Confused, if they had included these people's work in their papers, then I would have been more, as Jason would say, apt to listen. But they were so myopic in their choices that you start wondering what's the point? What's the agenda? What's behind that? And so, you know, I'm not out there to alienate and get in people's business, but I'll tell you what, if you're really worried about climate change and you're really worried about food and you're really worried about what you eat, you need healthy soil or you're not going to have any of it going the way you want it to go. And if someone can show me a way to regenerate soil anywhere close to the efficiency and the profitability of this type of grazing, and I'm open to other types of grazing, I'm open to other types of agriculture. This is just the one we've seen that had the most bang for the buck. That's why we're studying it. That's all. Otherwise, it's all great, but that's the one we found that was the most effective, so that's why we're spending our time looking at it. You can find me something even close. Again, that's as profitable and efficient and that nature clearly votes for because they show up on these farms. Again, deer and birds and all these things, they go where they want to go. Of course, deer, you might have too many of them, so they might go more than where they want to go. But my point being, show me something that's as good a way to build soil, and I'm all ears. I just haven't seen it. Haven't seen it at all.
Yeah, that's, you know, the word regeneration, you know, I think is something that is so important because, you know, we talk about mitigation, the damage or the degeneration, but all the other supposed or proposed solutions don't really have a regenerative component to them, at least the ones I haven't seen. You know, I look at, and this is something that we'll be seeing, you know, in the next few years, definitely showing up as a cell cultured meat. You know, and I think the belief is you can take a little cell from a cow and it magically grows into this giant hamburger with no inputs. But the reality is you basically have the same degenerative soy and pea protein inputs to provide the protein to grow that stuff. So have you looked in any detail on that proposed solution? Is it viable? My understanding is it's probably even more reliant on fossil fuels than conventional agriculture might be.
You know, anytime someone's choosing a lab over Mother Nature, I'm going to be leaning towards Mother Nature. I haven't looked into the cell-based meats in detail, but the idea that just the electricity, just the fact that you're removing a natural event, and you know, herd impact is a powerful healing tool when properly utilized to build soil and to build natural areas and to rebuild prairies, all those things. So yeah, I worry when we get too far away from nature. And I was just going to lean into, Bill Gates has just written a book, and I don't hear him talking about regenerative agriculture. Maybe I missed it. But he did a whole bunch of interviews, and I didn't hear him talking about regenerative agriculture. And he's the biggest farmland owner in the United States. And so here he is sitting on a huge solution. And if he doesn't know it yet, if he hasn't seen enough science yet, then maybe we can help fill that gap with our research, right? We just had our first paper published from our team from this research. And Dr. Sam Mosier, Mosier, Samantha, look it up. And if you go to our website, carboncowboys.org, and you look under research, it's right there. And we've got all of our short films there as well. So we're going to be a portal for this stuff. And so wouldn't it be amazing if Bill Gates came to the conclusion that nature was something to work with? Maybe he has. Maybe he's not talking about it yet. I don't know. But he's got such a large megaphone. He's got such enormous resources. And he actually owns the land. So if he's a scientist and an engineer, he should be curious. And if he's curious, he should hire Gabe Brown to regenerate 40 acres of one of his millions and millions of acres. Just give him a quarter. Give him a little thing, 160 acres, and come back in a year and see what it looks like. I think his mind would be blown.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think Bill Gates, as you mentioned, the silvery powder to reflect the sun's rays to protect. I mean, he's been a proponent of funding that or exploring that. He's also publicly stated he thinks all Western society should go to synthetic meat. So he may have some significant mind changing to do. I know I'll be moving up to the Seattle area. Maybe I'll run into him and have a conversation with him.
There you go. You're going to move to Seattle?
Yeah, well, yeah, I will be. Yeah. So
I've always wanted to live there. I was in a band in the 80s, and my bandmates were like, we don't want to go to Seattle. Nothing's happening up there for the music scene. And right. And I just have to say this because it's one of my favorite bakeries on the earth, Macrina Bakery. Do you eat any like things that would make me smile, or are you like?
I eat a lot of steak. It might make you smile. I don't know.
I like that. Do you eat any pastries at all?
No, I don't. I haven't in years. I'm fine. I'm okay with that.
Okay.
But,
Well, then,
I want to do just. You did a film called Garbage, I think, correct? Yeah. Well, can you tell us a little bit about that? Because I'm intrigued about that. I mean, what was the premise of that movie?
Yeah, that was my first feature documentary, and we were really fortunate to win South by Southwest back in 1996, back in the 1900s, as my boys would call it. And it's a film about garbage problems across the United States. And we made it very serendipitously. We had a central character who was a janitor who wished he was a rock star, but he wasn't that good at music. But each town he went to, going west from Kentucky to California, had a worse and worse garbage problem that then we explored as filmmakers. In Kentucky, Fruit of the Loom wanted to put a whole lot more pollution into Lake Cumberland. And all the people that were saying, well, that's going to kill the tourism business, fought it. And Fruit of the Loom was the biggest employer in the state of Kentucky. And they said, well, screw you guys, we're going to move to Arkansas. And then down in Nashville, I'm not going to go to each town, but in Nashville, they had a landfill that was full. It was illegally open, outlived its life, and they had to site a new one, and there was a huge fight of where to put it. Of course, it's going to go where the poor people live, just like every interstate cut through poor people's neighborhoods in every town across the country. So we just went west, and the worst story we got was in Needles, California, where they were trying to put a nuclear waste depository there. And they've been trying for 40 years, but they can't build it safely because guess what? It's right on a fault. It's like, who even thought of saying yes to the idea of studying to put it there when it's in California? And so that film is all about garbage problems. And we really didn't look at solutions too often in that film. That was a long time ago. And I just saw one thing. Who thought of putting it there? A politician. I think you're right. And in the movie, the guy who's fighting it, it's this guy in his 80s, and he's like, if it's so safe, why don't they put it in Washington, D.C.? I love that line. So that film sort of got me going. It got me working a lot, and it was a really amazingly hard film to make. Our tagline our tagline was, first we shot it, then we wrote it, then we raised the money, and that's actually true. It's not the order of things I would recommend for making a movie.
I'll remember that if I ever make a movie. I know, who knows? I mean, I never thought I'd write a book, and then I ended up writing a book. It was never on my to-do list. But
There you go.
interestingly, one of the things, because I thought it might touch on this, but as you probably are aware, we have such a huge problem with food waste in the country. Something like 40% of the food we produce ends up in a landfill, and obviously that's a waste problem.
Talk
And
about methane.
yeah, exactly. And it's kind of one of those things that all that food is just rotting, producing methane, and some of the other concerns. If the cows aren't eating grass, well, the grass is gonna fall over and die and produce methane anyway. And so it's kind of one of this sort
There's a lot of methane coming out of the Corn Belt from all the compressed soil. There's a lot of methane coming out of there right now. And I'm going to jump into something real quick here, because when we produce corn conventionally, we lose a lot of soil to erosion. According to the USDA, a fellow named Jerry Hatfield, who's retired, but he worked in Iowa. For every pound of corn we harvest, we lose 2 pounds of soil to erosion. And one of the first papers our team wrote was, what's the carbon implications of that soil? Because the soil does have carbon in it. And if that carbon then gets blown up in the air, what's the greenhouse gas effect of that soil erosion? And it was higher than the greenhouse impact of methane from cattle in an unhealthy cattle system. Corn. And of course, so much of that corn's grown for cattle, so it's a system going in the wrong direction. You can grow that corn regeneratively. You can raise your cattle on grasslands. It's not like stop this industry by any stretch. It's improve this industry by every stretch.
Let me just ask you this, because you may know more than I do. I mean, obviously, I've spent a lot of time talking about animal agriculture because I eat meat and I like eating meat. But equally, I mean, tilled land for growing whatever it's corn or mangoes or apples or whatever, how they do. Are we seeing a big movement in that direction as well? Are the conventional, NPK fertilizer, herbicide, pesticide guys, are they coming to a realization point that what they're doing is potentially problematic as well? The soybean farmers in Iowa and Kansas, and are we going to see an equal movement? Are you aware of that going on?
Well, my focus is on grazing, but you definitely hear of no-till and you definitely hear of cover crops. And I've seen studies where they just do no-till and they compare it to the other side, and it's like, well, there's no big improvement. But no-till is part of the problem. Cover crop is the other part of the problem. And so if you use them together, it's a very efficient system. I've learned from the Rodale Institute in Pennsylvania. They were in carbonation. And when you combine those two things, you have a huge carbon drawdown. And if you add compost to that, compost that would have otherwise been emitting methane in a landfill, you have a massive carbon drawdown. So it's just about money, really. Jerry Hatfield, again, from USDA, he taught me the idea of profit per acre, not yield per acre. And if farmers only measured their profit per acre, they would be doing things differently, but they've all been sort of taught, and they're all part of this game to see how much yield they can get per acre, but they're in debt as a result. I heard the corn prices are pretty good this year, so that's, so farmers aren't hurting like they were in years past. And again, we want farmers to succeed. We want the folks making our food to be profitable, right? Farmers and teachers should not be in debt. Farmers and teachers are essential. And what kind of society is it when we have farmers and teachers in such debt that we have, right? And so we're on the farmer's side, and and I'm just watching the farmers that we're working with. Some are spending tens of thousands of dollars a year on fertilizer when they're planting their seeds, and the other ones are just using the manure and the urine from the animals. And the ones using the manure and the urine from their animals have more working nitrogen in their soil. Like even nature's giving them more nitrogen than if you were putting it in and hoping it works. So why would I support someone spending tens of thousands of dollars and hoping that they get rain 3 days later, hoping that it works, you know, that's a lot of money. I don't know any farmer that has margins to get through that, you know, to weather tens of thousands of dollars of inefficiently spent money. I'm sure there's some big farms and stuff, but most farms are family run still, you know. I think I read something like over 80% of food on earth is still a family farm grown.
Yeah, I know on the ranching side, I mean, I think in the US we have around 700,000 cattle ranches, and the average herd size is about 40, 50 head. So it's pretty relatively small.
Right.
I think that point about profit over yield is an extremely important point because, you
Yep.
know, we talk about the average person who goes into farming or ranching takes on enormous debt to buy the land, to buy the equipment, to buy the fertilizers, to stay in this system is incredibly, you know, you kind of get sucked into this hole that you can't get out of. You're continuing to sort of shovel snow when it's raining type of thing. You can never get out of that. And this is a way to break out of that. Are you seeing any other alliances like you talked about Shell Oil and McDonald's? Are you seeing any other major alliances that are evolving that could significantly help these farmers that are, because many, you know, like many people, I've listened to people and they say, hey, I'm an engineer, I want to go farm. But then, you know, the reality of it is maybe a little more challenging than you think. But are you seeing any more alliances developing that you think are going to be beneficial?
Well, I can just say what we're excited by, and the work we did with Shell was significant. I think there's a lot more that needs to be done there. Collaborating with McDonald's has been phenomenal, and you know, obviously, I don't know everyone that works at McDonald's, but the people I know genuinely care and want to use their giantness to do something good, to regenerate. And I hope that they stick around a long time in the company because, you know, companies change and people change and all that stuff. But these folks I'm working with, they got my attention and they got my vote. We've been working with Cargill. And Cargill has had a very big evolution from what I'm hearing from them to what they're saying now and what they're doing now. So if you get Cargill to push regenerative agriculture, they deal with 1 out of 10 farmers. They're the largest privately owned company in the US. It's, you know, we're talking scale, right? And Walmart's doing things. You know, I want Walmart to do more, but they're doing some pretty amazing things. And so that's the good news is it's actually good business to do these things. It's not charitable, right? It's actually good business. That's the best news we could have because we are in a capitalist society. And, you know, I'm not in the game of trying to rewrite how our economy is built, right? I'm in the game of how do we use what we've got to change. And that's why I went to the fossil fuel industry. I'm like, you guys, you made all the money from all the carbon. So why don't you use that same money to close the carbon cycle and do something positive as you change the way you do your business, because fossil fuel business as it is right now ain't going to be around forever.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, you know, you see there's, you know, we have obviously in my side always is I'm concerned about health, and we have a very unhealthy population just physically, and there are companies that benefit from that. I mean, you know, I'm going to point to the pharmaceutical industry squarely that they have lifetime customers. And while their interests may not be aligned in getting people healthy, there are other companies, like you point out, Shell or Walmart, or you know, some of these other companies that may have an interest, you know, in doing that. And so I think that's you know, a smart move to, you know, get these guys that have the capital to make the effect. And you know, some of it, are the politicians going to do that? Maybe some of them will, some of them won't. Some of them have, you know, we see the federal lobbying money. Most of the money is coming from the pharmaceutical industry. So, and we know where a lot of people's sort of thoughts are being at least directed at. Somebody keeps asking about the Musk brothers, Kimball Musk, and I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but is he someone you've ever considered approaching or?
You know, I've been wanting to meet him for a long time. A very small story. Elon Musk was selling one of his roadsters to one of our earliest funders, and potential funder said, "Hey, write Elon Musk a short email about your film Carbon Nation, why you want to make it." And so the first check we actually got in hand was from Elon Musk for $5,000 when we made Carbon Nation. I've seen him a few times. I've interviewed him a few times. I know he's really worried about the planet because he's wanting to basically move to Mars. And so I think the work that needs to be done right now with regenerative agriculture, the work that needs to be done with soil carbon measurement tools that got to be cheaper and cheaper and cheaper, integrating AI, integrating satellite imagery. I think the Musk brothers would be ideal partners in really making this thing a viable, real, scalable event. So I would love to meet Kimball. I just haven't yet. Would love to.
Yeah, it's kind of the foil to Bill Gates if Bill Gates doesn't come around. So hopefully we'll have an advocate that's got, you know, that sort of resource.
That resource.
Exactly.
Can I ask you a question, Sean?
Sure.
I don't have the brain space to talk to you and read the comments, but I'd love to read them. Are you guys saving them? Could you send them to me, or?
I'm not sure if we can. Like I said,
I know with Zoom they save automatically to whoever's the host.
Okay.
It saves as a text file in a little folder. Because I feel like I might be ignoring questions or something. I don't know. I don't mean to be.
I tried to you know, sort of ask the ones that were there. A lot of them were just comments and weren't really questions. Okay. So I think we got pretty much all the questions that were asked, quite honestly. Okay. But we can look into that. Just speaking of that, unfortunately, I've got to go do another interview here in just a few minutes, Peter. Yeah, this has been absolutely wonderful and glad to have you on. And thank you for doing what you do. Can you provide the name and the links for the places where we can find out about the films and your research? Because I want to look at that study you mentioned about that Samantha, and I forget the last name, put out there, but I want to.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so I'm typing them into the chat right now, if that's all right.
Oh, of course. Perfect.
So it's carboncowboys.org. And then my email address is peter.byck@asu.edu. And I'm just reading here that Kimball's a big advocate of hydroponics. So it's like, yeah, where do you find the sweet spot? Where do you find common ground? It's not, we don't have to all agree on everything, right? We just want to agree on some things. So,
well, I think we all can agree that, you know, making the world a better place to live in is good. It's just how we get there is where the contention is, I think. And so it's great that we're getting more and more people concerned about the soil. And I think it's great that the films are coming out. I mean, I've seen, you know, a number of films that have talked about, I know Diana Rogers, Rob Wolf put out a movie called Sacred Cow, which I thought was quite good. Yep. It's kind of in the same vein. I've seen a few others that are out there, but in your work as well. So look forward to more of this stuff. And Peter, thank you so much. Maybe we have to, when does the new film come out, by the way?
We're still making it. So we don't know.
We don't know.
We don't know, but we're hoping to be done this summer. We're hoping that it would be out and about in the first quarter of 2022.
If it comes out, would you be willing to come back on for another interview to talk about that specifically? Awesome. Of course. All right, Peter. Well, you have a great day. Thank you so much. The rest of you guys, I'll see you all tomorrow. Okay. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye now.